On today's show, we look at the all-time fantasy teams for three franchises: the Chicago Bulls, the Cleveland Cavaliers, and the Charlotte Hornets. I wonder who the starting shooting guard's going to be for the Chicago Bulls. Michael Bolton, he wants to find out.
Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com and at Yahoo Sports Australia. And you can find me on Twitter as always at redrock_bball and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. As I said, we're going to be looking at the all-time fantasy teams. And at the end of doing all of this, I'm going to compare all of these all-time teams in a big head-to-head league and a big roto league, 30-team head-to-head, 30-team roto league, to see which franchise has the best overall 13-man squad that I have gone through and selected mostly, almost 99.9% objectively, just by looking at what is the greatest season these guys have had. Sometimes there can be some subjectivity in terms of where guys slot into positions, but in general, the best 13 individual fantasy seasons of all time from that franchise, and then pitting them against each other. The winner, I know who the winner is. We'll see who it is when we get to the end of this series, though. So let's start by talking about the first team we're going to look at here, and that is the Charlotte Hornets. Their point guard, all-time point guard, of course, is the 2018-19 version of Kemba Walker. He was the 11th ranked player last season in total value. He averaged almost 26 points per game, which was a career high. Over 3 threes, 6 assists, 1.2 steals, shot fairly well also. Pretty much a no-brainer to have Kemba here as that number one player on this Hornets all-time team as their starting point guard. Big numbers across the board. Of course, they have fallen off a little bit this season with the Boston Celtics. That was to be expected as he is joined by better teammates, but that was really a fantastic year in his age 28 season. At shooting guard, it's Eddie Jones. He only played one season in Charlotte, but in that one season, he was the 8th ranked player. That's a pretty good effort. In fact, in per game value, he was 4th overall that year. He averaged 20 points per game, the only 20-point per game season that he had. 1.8 triples, which is a pretty strong amount for the 2000 season, the 99-2000 season. 4.2 assists, 2.7 steals. This was his 4th consecutive season with over 2 steals per game. The field goal percentage is a little bit rough, 43% from the field, but a whopping 86 from the line, up from 78 the year prior. Eddie Jones was an underrated fantasy player. He had 5 consecutive top 25 finishes, 7 consecutive top 30 finishes. A really, really strong fantasy player who I think goes a little bit underrated when we look back at players from that mid to late 90s period. Eddie Jones was really putting up some strong numbers. At small forward, it is Glen Rice, who put up big games or big seasons for the Miami Heat and then came across to the Charlotte Hornets. This is the Glen Rice from the 96-97 season. He was the 10th ranked player in fantasy that season. He played an astonishing 43 minutes a game and averaged 27 points. Both of those numbers career highs, a big 2.6 triples. He didn't do huge amounts else, but having that volume of scoring, that volume of threes, and then doing it with really big percentages is why he was so good in fantasy. 48 and 87, and again, 48% was a really strong number back in the 96-97 season, whereas now if you're at 48%, you're bang on an average number. That was well above average. It was 0.5 in terms of standard score, so that's a pretty decent chunk ahead there. And then really good on the free throws, 87% on 7 attempts. So Glen Rice is our small forward. He only played the 3 seasons in Charlotte, but he is our starting small forward on the all-time Hornets team. At power forward, it is none other than Grandmama Larry Johnson. His 2nd season in the NBA, the 92-93 year. He was the 20th ranked player that season. He played 41 minutes a night, the most minutes of his career, the best scoring season of his career. Johnson only played 10 years in the NBA. We'd hope he would play a little bit more, especially with how he started out in the scene. He averaged 22 and 11 that year. And I think something that I definitely didn't remember until I started doing this process is he averaged 4 assists a game as a power forward. That's a pretty big number. And that dropped off when he joined the Knicks. But for the Hornets, 3.6, 4.3, 3.6, 4.6, 4.4. And then with the Knicks, it was down in 2.5, 2.3, that sort of range. But they're big assist numbers. Never a big shot blocker, never a big steal guy, but 53 and 77 is his percentages. You have to be okay with that. Didn't hit threes, but big scoring, big rebounding, good assists, and a great field goal percentage. Puts Larry Johnson as a second-round fantasy player around that time. And, of course, puts him here on the Hornets' all-time fantasy squad. And their center, his partner in crime. These two were huge news back when I started getting back into the NBA in that 91, 92, 93 period. The front court of the Hornets was, of course, Alonzo Mourning and Larry Johnson. Mourning only played 3 seasons in Charlotte, but they were 3 really, really good seasons. The season we're going with here was his 94-95 season. That's overall his best fantasy year. He was the 15th ranked player that season, 21 and 10 in 38 minutes and almost 3 blocks, 52 and 76. Really big numbers across both percentages there. He even started hitting some threes. He didn't hit any in his first 2 seasons in the league, but he was at .14. Now, that's a really small amount, but he did start to hit some threes. Of course, when he went to Miami, the three-point shooting disappeared. So he only had this real 2-year window where he was hitting threes. But obviously, a really, really good player who, the end of his career was sort of ruined by the illness stuff that we did have to go through, and he missed a couple of years of action due to those problems with his kidneys. So that is our Hornets starting 5. Kemba Walker, Eddie Jones, Glen Rice, Larry Johnson, and Alonzo Mourning. Backup point guard, we've got David Wesley. This is the 98-99 version of David Wesley. He was the 16th ranked player that season. We saw him appear on the Boston Celtics team as well, where he had a really big season back there. He averaged 14, 3, and 6 with 2 steals in this season for the Charlotte Hornets. Really an underrated player. And then at backup shooting guard, it's Jason Richardson. He only played that 1 season in Charlotte, at the 07-08 season, but he was the 14th best player in fantasy in that year. 38 minutes, 22 points per game, 3 triples a game, 1.4 steals. That volume of threes, the volume of scoring is what puts him into this spot. Backup small forward, we're going with Gerald Wallace, who was a real fantasy stud in the mid to late 2000s. This is the 2009-2010 version, where he was the 14th best player. He averaged 18 and 10 in 41 minutes, over a block, over 1.5 steals, really good percentage numbers as well. Gerald Wallace was really good for this 3-4 year window, and then he went to Portland and Brooklyn, and things disappeared pretty quickly. Your backup power forward is Anthony Mason, the 96-97 version of Anthony Mason, the 38th ranked player that year. His first of 3 seasons in Charlotte. He played 43 minutes a game. That is insanity. 16 and 11 with almost 6 assists per game. And like Larry Johnson, I don't go back and think of Anthony Mason as being this huge assist guy, but he averaged 6 assists per game. Now, he didn't do anything in terms of steals or blocks, 0.8 and 0.2 in that year, but really, really big out-of-position numbers for Anthony Mason. Your backup center is Vlade Divac. He's the 96-97 version of Divac. This is, he had better seasons, of course, when he's with the Lakers, and we might see him appear on the Lakers all-time team later on. 29th ranked player this season for Charlotte, 35 minutes, 13 and 9, but it's 1.3 steals and 2.2 blocks that really gets him into the conversation. And then my last 3 guys on this squad are Baron Davis from the 2001-2002 season, where he was the 23rd ranked player. Hershey Hawkins from the 94-95 season, where he was the 24th ranked player. He had some better seasons in Philadelphia, but still really strong as a member of the Hornets. And then a bloke who we saw last time I did this on the Atlanta team, Steven Jackson, jumps in for the Charlotte Hornets in the 2009-2010 season. At age 31, he was the 23rd ranked player, averaging 39 minutes and 21 points per game. That is your Charlotte Hornets all-time fantasy team. Let's move on now and talk about the Chicago Bulls. All right, there are a few players in this Chicago Bulls starting lineup that nobody is going to be surprised about. At point guard, it is Derrick Rose. Again, no shock there. The 2010-2011 season from Derrick Rose, where he was the 4th best player in fantasy, averaging 25, 4, and 8. Only a steal per game, but that scoring was so big, 1.6 triples as well. Great from getting to the free throw line, which is a real issue for him after the injury and even before these couple of seasons. 7 attempts from the line, 86%. That's what really elevated him up, because the year before he was at 77% on 4 attempts, so really elevating there. But big scoring, decent enough threes, good assist numbers. This was, of course, the Derrick Rose MVP season. The next player who is surprised about this? The best fantasy player of all time, Michael Jordan, is your starting shooting guard for the Chicago Bulls. This is the 87-88 version of Michael Jordan, which interestingly enough, now he had multiple number one overall finishes, but this is the first time he finished overall number one with a standard score overall value of almost 2, which is an unfathomably big number. Jordan in 87-88 averaged 35 points in 40 minutes. He hit 0.1 threes, of course, but 5.5 boards, 6 assists, an absolutely staggering 3.2 steals, 1.6 blocks. That is insanity. He's a guard. Like, a big man has 1.6 blocks. Yeah, it's not bad. He's a guard, 1.6. That is out of control. 54% from the field on 24 attempts. Stupid. 84% from the line, 11 attempts. Also stupid. Michael Jordan was stupidly good as a fantasy basketball player, as an NBA player. We all know that. And of course, he is on the Chicago Bulls all-time team. At small forward, who's going to be surprised that the player next to Jordan is Pippen, Scottie Pippen. The 94-95 season of Scottie Pippen, though, this is a Jordanless season. He was the 5th best player in fantasy that year, averaging 21 and 8 with 5 assists, almost 3 steals, over a block, 1.4 triples, just really big numbers. Now, unfortunately, his free throw shooting let him down throughout his career, just 72%. If that was like 85%, then we're talking about, probably the number one player in fantasy that season. But Scottie Pippen slides in pretty comfortably there as your starting small forward. At power forward, it's not Dennis Rodman, Pau Gasol. Because when Gasol was playing with the Bulls, he was the power forward. He played next to Joakim Noah. He was their starting power forward. In that season, which is the 2014-15 season, first year in Chicago, Gasol was the 11th ranked player. His second best overall finish. He had 3 years where he was the 9th best player, and then he was this season in the 11th best player. He averaged 19 and 12, almost 2 blocks, 1.9, 49%, 80 from the line. Really, really strong stuff from Pau. He would have one more good season and then the wheels would start to fall off after that when he joined the San Antonio Spurs. But Pau Gasol is your starting power forward for the Chicago Bulls. And at center, it's not Bill Cartwright, it's not Bill Wennington, it's not Luke Longley. It's Artis Gilmore from the 1981-82 season. His last season in Chicago before he joined the Spurs. 5th ranked player overall that season, Gilmore was averaging 19 and 10 with 2.7 blocks on astonishing 65 and 77 as his 2 percentages. So really, really strong in those percentage numbers. So your Bulls all-time starting 5, Rose, Jordan, Pippen, Gasol, and Artis Gilmore. Into the backups. At point guard, Kirk Hinrich is the backup point guard. The 06-07 version of Hinrich, the 17th best player in fantasy that season. 17, 3 and 6, 1.3 steals, 84% from the line. Yeah, solid enough. Not fantastic, but not Derrick Rose levels, but still solid enough to come in as your backup point guard. For your backup shooting guard, it is, of course, Jim Butler.
Because he's my butler.
General Soreness comes in for his 16-17 campaign here for Chicago, the last season before he would get traded to the Minnesota Timberwolves, the 11th ranked player in that year, averaged 24, 6 and 5.5, 1.9 steals, 1.2 triples. Struggled a little bit with his shooting, but great from the line, almost 9 attempts and 87% there. So he is your backup shooting guard. For your backup small forward, it's Reggie Theus, who was played some shooting guard, but played some small forward as well. This is the 82-83 version of Theus before he would end up going to the Kings. In 82-83, he was the 7th ranked player. He averaged 24 points per game, a career high, 6 assists, 1.7 steals, 48 and 80. So really the key sort of markers of an excellent fantasy season. Big assists, great scoring, and really, really strong percentage numbers. At power forward, backup power forward, it is Horace Grant, the 91-92 season of Horace Grant. He was obviously a really key part of those Bulls' early championships, but this is his best fantasy season, the 24th ranked player overall in that season. 14 and 10 with 1.6 blocks, 1.2 steals, so like his nephew, he gets those steals and blocks. 58 from the field, 74 from the line. Didn't hit any threes, but some really strong numbers overall from Horace Grant. I'm a bit surprised to look back and see that Horace never averaged more than 15 points per game, though. Your backup center, Chicago Bulls' favorite son, it is Joakim Noah, the 13-14 season from Noah, the 15th best player in fantasy that season. He averaged only 13 points, but 11 boards, 5.5 assists is really where he started ramping up the passing. With Derrick Rose injured, 1.2 steals, 1.5 blocks, and before he became one of the worst free throw shooters in the world, he was at 74%. He would, of course, go down to be under 45% there in the 16-17 season with the Knicks. An astonishing drop-off in that free throw shooting. To round things out, the last three guys on this roster, it's another Rose. It's Jalen Rose, the 01-02 version of Jalen Rose. He was the 27th ranked player that season, coming across from the Pacers, averaging 20 points with 1 3, 4.5 assists, 4.5 rebounds. Yeah, solid enough, really good free throw numbers from him. And then two blokes from the 06-07 team. Luol Deng comes in here as the 21st ranked player that season. He averaged 19-7, a perfect roto player, solid contributions across the board. But weirdly, Deng wasn't hitting any threes at all there. I don't think he barely even hit 1 3 for that entire season. He shot 14% and was at 0.01 threes made. In fact, he hit 1 3 for that entire season, which is pretty weird considering he hit 52 in his first 2 seasons. So a real change in Deng's game. The last guy is a guy who, of course, is hitting a ton of those threes, and that is Ben Gordon, the 22nd ranked player in 06-07. He averaged 21 points that season with 1.9 triples. He did very little else, very Reggie Miller-ish in terms of his contributions, big scoring, big threes, and not much else, but good from the free throw line and got there a solid amount, 5.5 attempts per game for Benny Gordon. And that rounds out your Bulls team. Their starters, Derrick Rose, Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, Pau Gasol, and Artis Gilmore. Then Hinrich, Butler, Theus, Grant, Noah, Jalen Rose, Luol Deng, and Benny Gordon. That is your all-time Chicago Bulls fantasy team. Let's move on now and talk about the Cleveland Cavaliers. All right, for the Cavs, there was a little bit of finagling here in this starting lineup, but I think it makes sense. And again, when I had to sort of, not finagle things, when I had to sort of change things around, I did it so it would make complete sense. And it's not like these players wouldn't fit on the team, but I tried to make the best squad that I could. And it's starting point guard, it's Mark Price, the 88-89 version of Mark Price. He was the 11th best player that season for fantasy, 19 points, 8.5 assists, a really big 1.2 triples per game, which was huge back then, 90% from the line, and for a bloke who's bombing threes, 53% shooting, just huge stuff from Mark Price. He was really, really underrated. So he is your Cavs all-time starting point guard. Of course, the bloke who was in contention for that spot, I just slid him across to shooting guard because it's Kyrie Irving. He shoots a lot. He can definitely play as a shooting guard. That's where I put him. You can have arguments about that, but I wanted to fit the best players into this whole 13-man squad, and I found this was the better way of doing it. So Irving, this is the 14-15 season of Kyrie Irving, the 10th best player that year, 22 points before LeBron arrived, 5 assists, 1.5 steals, 47 and 86% from the field and from the line. So Kyrie Irving is your starting shooting guard.
LeBron James.
He is, of course, your starting small forward, but which LeBron James is it? What was his best season as a member of the Cavs? It was the 08-09 season for LeBron, the second-ranked player overall that season. He averaged 28, 7.5, and 7, 1.7 steals, over a block, 49 and 78. Weird that his field goal percentage was as low as it was, 49%, but he hit 1.6 triples. He was, of course, we know, an absolute fantasy beast for years and years and years, and he slides in as your all-time Cavs starting small forward. At power forward, it's Larry Nance, not the current Larry Nance, his old man, the 91-92 version of Nance. He was the 13th ranked player that season. He averaged 17 and 8 with 3 blocks and 54% and 82% from the line. So an absolute fantasy start. Unfortunately, he hit no threes. The steals were pretty low and the assists weren't great, but still a really, really good fantasy play. He was better in terms of fantasy back in his Phoenix days, but he slides in pretty comfortably as the starting power forward here. Your starting center is Brad Daugherty, the 91-92 version of Daugherty, where he was the 21st ranked player, 21 and 10, 1 block, 57 and 78. That 57% is really where his fantasy bread was buttered. Also, the 21 points don't hurt. The low block numbers for a center, of course, but really strong. Overall, Daugherty is your starting center. So Mark Price, Kyrie Irving, LeBron James, Larry Nance, and Brad Daugherty, your all-time Cavs starting 5. Backing up Mark Price, Andre Miller. I needed to slot him in here because he was obviously really a great player for many teams, but this is the 01-02 version of Miller, the 13th best player in fantasy that season. He averaged 16 and 5 with 11 assists, 1.6 steals, and 45 and 82 from the field and line. So it needed to get Andre Miller in there. Your backup shooting guard is Ronnie Harper, rugged Ronnie Harper, the 88-89 version of Ron Harper before he moved across to the Clippers. He was the 17th best player that year, 19 points per game, over 2 steals, over 5 assists, 51% shooting. Just really, really good fantasy stuff from Ron Harper. Your backup small forward is Wesley Person, who played for a number of teams in the NBA. This is the 97-98 version of Wesley Person, where he was ranked 17th in fantasy. 39 minutes a game. The only time he really pushed over 30, that's not true. He pushed a couple of times over 30. The only time he pushed over 30 in a Cleveland uniform, apart from his final season. 15 points, 2.3 triples is really what his value was, and 1.6 steals. So a 3-and-D guy. And then at power forward, Shawn Kemp comes in, the 98-99 version of Kemp. He was the 31st ranked player that season. He averaged 20 and 9, over a steal, over a block, 48 and 79, like really solid numbers, but not his best years. Of course, they came as a member of the Seattle Supersonics. We'll see them later on when we do the Sonics/Thunder franchise. But Kemp comes in here and slots into the backup power forward. And then at backup center, Big Z, Zydrunas Ilgauskas. This was Ilgauskas in the 04-05 season, where he was the 23rd best player, 34 minutes, 17 and 9, over 2 blocks, 80% from the line. He's never going to produce in assists or steals or hit threes, but nice rebounds, nice blocks, and a really strong free throw shooter as a big man. For your backup point guard, well, not your backup point guard, the last 3 men on your roster, there was a lot of guards on the Cavs. Terrell Brandon, really, really small guard here, played the first 6 seasons of his career in Cleveland. This is the 95-96 version of Terrell Brandon, where he was the 11th ranked player, 19 and 3 with 6.5 assists and 1.8 steals on 89% from the line. And then another guard comes in, Mike Bratz, the 80-81 version of Bratz, the 15th ranked player that season, 10, 2.5 and 6 assists with 1.7 steals. He shot a horrendous 39% from the field, but 81 from the line. And then the last player we look at, World B. Free, the 90-85-86, his last year in Cleveland. He was the 23rd ranked player at age 32, 23 points per game. This guy had an astonishing streak of scoring over 20 points per game. And after this season, he would go to Philadelphia and average 6 points per game. 23 points, a 3, 4 assists, 1.2 steals, but really those threes and that scoring is what put Free here onto this all-time Cavs team. That does it for me. All the Hornets, all the Bulls, all the Cavs. Which team of those do you think is the strongest? I think it's pretty obvious. What changes would you have made subjectively? Again, this was pretty objectively when I did this, but let me know what you think. Who also do you think is going to be the best team overall? Drop it down in the comments below. Tweet it at me. Who do you think is going to win the overall 30-team Roto tournament and the 30-team head-to-head tournament I have between all these 13-man squads? Don't forget, after today's show, go and check out today's episode of Hollinger and Duncan. Tell your smart device to go play Hollinger and Duncan. Subscribe to this show, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube. Leave a thumbs up, leave a comment, leave a review. All of those things help out immensely. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.